Is humanity's greatest experiment democracy? Is democracy humanity's greatest experiment?
Democracy supposedly means rule by the people. But democracy did not originate in the form that we have today. Democracy was a system of slavery. It was based on slavery. It allowed those who were not slaves. How are you, right?
I saw that time when the Tommy Robinson fans, they pushed off the ladder. I tried to make a video about it stuff, and you're not Muslim. And
I'm not
they
Muslim.
knocked you off as well.
They did indeed. But I mean, we had to expose them, so.
Take care.
You too.
Content over everything!
Democracy originated in slave society, and it was based upon slavery. So in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome, there were democratic rights for the slave owners. And those who were slaves were not considered to be real human beings. Aristotle used to use the word speaking tools. So they were like robots, if you like, or non-humans. Meanwhile, because the slaves did the work for the slave owners had sufficient time to engage in discussions about what was done with public resource, or better said, with slave-owning state resources. And so slavery was the foundation for democracy. So firstly, democracy is not a system of rule by the people. It is a system of rule by the people based on a certain economic foundation. Now, the democracy we have in Britain today is also of a similar character with a slight amendment. It's true there are more slaves today than there were at the time of Greece, Rome or Egypt, or even the United States of America and Brazil being slave states and the Caribbean being states. There are more slaves today than there were at that time. But the system of democracy is not based upon slavery today, not on physical slavery of other human beings. Instead of this, the system of democracy that we have today is based upon the wage slavery of the majority of the population. So the majority of the people go to work for a wage every week. They must go to work for a wage because they don't have any savings they can live from, accumulated from generations going back to 3 million years ago when hominids first stood upright. All the work of the ancestors of the majority of humanity does not belong to them. And because of that, democracy exists within a framework where the vast structure of inequality, the biggest inequality in human history, is the foundation for that democracy. And the problem, of course, is with what I would call capitalist democracy or wage slavery democracy, is that it enables those with an enormous amount of accumulated wealth, who have assimilated and accumulated the wealth of generations into their hands, like Donald Trump, for example, are able to buy power within the democratic framework by manipulating the mechanisms that connect to the minds of the people who cross a piece of paper. So if the idea is crossing a piece of paper to elect a political party or an individual, if that constitutes democracy, based upon a structure of wealth and power where a tiny minority control the majority of wealth, then of course democracy is a very limited phenomenon. So that doesn't mean I'm opposed to democracy. It means I believe that democracy is a system based on particular social relations of power and subordination. Under capitalism, it is the most efficient mechanism, an effective mechanism for the exploitation of the majority, to have a system whereby the people believe that those who rule, in inverted commas, have parliamentary positions, executive positions, legislative positions, the president or prime minister and so on, that these officials, politicians and so on, and structures of power are somehow legitimated by people crossing a piece of paper once every 5 years or once every 3 or 4 years. The problem lies in this, is that it is always based upon a particular foundation of exploitation. So if you had a society where that system of exploitation was abolished, or at least crushed at the top level and then gradually diminished at the lower level, then you could have, or you could argue, that you might have a genuine type of democracy, where the people, as in ancient Greek, language meant where the people control the power by the people, democracy. But as I said, all democracy until today has been based on a particular form of exploitation of the majority of the population. So when they say democracy, you always have to understand what type of society is that so-called democratic structure operating within. And of course, there was the famous phrase used many years ago. I will qualify it, but also state it first of all. If democracy changed anything, they would abolish it. So in other words, there are limits to the degree to which the exercise of the democratic will is able to actually impact the structure of power in society. And why does it matter? Particularly in Britain today, I think it matters a lot. For the following reason. For the first time in the history of democracy in Britain, by the way, democracy in the sense of one man, one woman, one vote at an equal level has only existed since 1928 in Britain.
Mr. Speaker.
And yet Parliament, supposedly the physical incarnation of the democratic process, has existed since 1247. So for the majority of the existence of the Palace of Westminster and parliamentary democracy,
Mr. Speaker.
there has been no right to vote for the majority of the population.
Heiko, I would say that we're actually in an autocracy.
Well, I mean, fair enough, but
the Queen's the head of state.
I tried to clarify what the limitations on the structure of democracy are. The second element to this question, why relevant today, is because for the first time since we had the right to vote for men and women, we actually have a candidate leading the Labour Party who believes in democracy, as in democracy meaning the exercise of power over wealth. Now, that is a new phenomenon. We only had, Keir Hardie in, was it 1920? Was it 1924? Was it the first Labour government? Can't remember. In any case, but when he came to power there, the minority government was sabotaged and overthrown. It was overthrown by a claim, false claim as it turned out, that the Labour Party was in the pay of the Russians. So not so many things change in Britain. And of course now there is a real likelihood, because last week when Theresa May won the vote, I believe it was on Wednesday, was it Wednesday? She just about scraped through the vote by rigging the parliamentary system, because there's an agreement. If I'm with the Labour Party and you're with the Tory Party, you can pair off and agree not to turn up. And that agreement was broken by the Tory Party this week in order to sustain Theresa May, nay, no longer Theresa May, because the Prime Minister of Britain is no longer Theresa May. Officially, Theresa May is the Prime Minister, but Rees-Mogg is now the Prime Minister. That's what everything is confirmed. Even the Tory grandees have admitted that Rees-Mogg now controls the Conservative Party. She must do what he says, or he'll bring her down. And of course, the only reason why the Conservatives were prepared to turn up even to the limited number they did was because they fear a Labour government. And then what happens? As soon as the chance of a relatively rapid general election comes up, with Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party, suddenly you get Member of Parliament who's constantly been criticising Jeremy Corbyn, resigns from Parliament, resigns from the Labour Party. Another one, Margaret Hodge, runs up to Jeremy Corbyn and brings out the old slur, Jeremy Corbyn, you're a fucking anti-Semite, or something of that nature, she said to him, excuse my French. And so this is a campaign whereby the Tories are in internal collapse. It's not leaving the European Union or remaining in the European Union, this debate. The issue is, will Jeremy Corbyn, in other words, a person who believes that democracy means the right to encroach on private property. That's what it means. And that is the fundamental basis for any real, I say that because it's more than 2,000 years we have so-called democracy in various parts of the world. But each time, democracy's been based upon a particular type of exploitation. As I pointed out, it originated as a system of slavery, a political structure for slavery, which was where the term comes from, democracy. It's like other terms. Many people think, oh, the term means this. Doesn't necessarily mean that. Think of the most simple terms that even a child, a baby, the first thing they learn, mama, papa, right? Mama, papa, child, family, right? But if you actually bother to investigate the meaning of the term, the word family is a Latin word, and it means the man and his slaves. It does not include his wife and does not include his children. But over the years, we've come to believe family means something different. And so the meaning of the word got twisted and changed. And nowadays, we associate it with mama, papa, child, family. But actually, family, just like democracy, originated on the base of slavery. And we still live in a democratic structure where slavery, wage slavery, the dominance of the few over the majority, the compulsion to work by billions of people, many of them doing absolutely useless and meaningless work, is the standard mechanism of operating society. And so, what is democracy? Democracy can mean a mechanism for challenging the wealth and power of the elite. But to date, democracy has not meant that. And when it finally does mean that, when we finally do get rid of the extraordinary inequality, higher than ever before in human history, 8 people own more wealth than half of the world, 8 people more wealth than half of the world. 150 companies in Britain control 80% of the wealth of the country. 8 out of every 10. You walk down the street here. I just crossed the road here from by the American embassy, walked up there. And I saw, you remember a few years ago, there was a big hoo-ha in the press. Squatters have taken 3 multi-million-pound buildings in Park Lane. Huge hoo-ha. 2 weeks later, they were evicted. Thank God, property is protected. Those same buildings have sat empty ever since. Ever since. While people sleep on the street in front. Yes, they've got a right to vote, those people sleeping on the street. If they're lucky, they'll register as homeless. They'll get a right to vote in Westminster. But their right to vote will not give them the key to the door to the empty property that's been sitting there 30 years empty. So property is sacrosanct under so-called democracy. So I believe that only a democracy that is allowed and is able, better said, not allowed, is able, through the will of the people, to exercise sufficient power to break that structure of wealth that holds the entire world by the throat. Only then can you really talk about democracy. And of course, if democracy really was power by the people for the people, then of course it would begin to disappear. Because if human beings are cultured enough to accept that where there is resources, they should be matched with those who need those resources. Where there are skills, those skills should be matched to solve the problems on Earth, without the barrier and encumbrance of needing to produce a profit out of every single human action. And if that was the case, then human behaviour will change, will alter, and human culture will replace the need for a democratic vote to say we don't do this or we do this. And therefore human culture will eventually surpass democracy. Because democracy means, let's face it, democracy is also a crude instrument. It means we have a majority, therefore you're a loser. Right? I mean, take Brexit. Right? People voted for Brexit, 52-48. There's a big debate now. Tony Blair jumps in. Others, shall we have another referendum? We lost by 2%, or 4% they say, so we should have another referendum. So democracy inevitably means the suppression of the minority. And that, of course, is not what everybody wants out of democracy. They want equality and recognition. And therefore, only when you reach a society where the people control the resources can you really talk about democracy. But that will also mean the gradual disappearance of democracy. Because culture will accept, you have an opinion, I have an opinion, we can agree to disagree, you do this, I do that. If the resources are there to allow that. So, I hope that answers the question. Are there any questions for you? I can see you pregnant. With questions? Maybe not. No, I didn't mean that, honestly, I didn't mean it. Now, I thought, as soon as I said it, I thought, oh, but I didn't mean that.
I know it's getting you.
I didn't, no, it was all me too. I just had a vindaloo. Any more from any more?
Should the poem If be banned? Should the poem If be banned?
I haven't followed that discussion. What's it about?
Rudyard Kipling wrote a poem.
Oh, right, oh, and I did see this discussion. You see, part of the whole debate about Tommy Robinson, the far right in Europe, Donald Trump in America, ISIS or ISIL in Syria and Iraq. What is going on in the world? You ask yourself this, you look at Donald Trump on television, one day he's attacking Germany, next day he's attacking Theresa May, next day he's attacking the Russians, next day he's supporting the Russians, one day he's attacking North Korea, next day he's making a deal with North Korea. It's all quite confusing. 1 minute he's attacking China, next day he's trying to make a deal with China. It's all quite, and then one day he's grabbing a pussy, next day he's the greatest defender of women's rights. Now, given these circumstances, it's quite understandable that people get very confused. What the hell is going on in the world? Didn't we have an order that was gradually becoming more progressive, gradually introducing liberal reforms, gradually accepting of different racial groups, different sexual groups, different social lifestyles, their diversity and so on? Greater internationalization. Wasn't that the trajectory that we grew up to experience and believe in? And yet suddenly, over the last 10 years, everything has gone wrong. So it appears from this theoretical standpoint. The problem is, once again, we're dealing with frameworks of thinking about the issues. If you misunderstood the question that I addressed earlier on, what is democracy? Then of course you're also going to misunderstand the trajectory of that democracy. Democracy under modern society in capitalism means the ownership, firstly, the ownership and control of the overwhelming majority of the resources in this world by a tiny handful of people. And once you have that framework, that hierarchy in place, which was established over hundreds of years before you had the right to vote, once you then granted the right to vote and certain encroachments, the middle classes, who are relatively well-to-do in whatever country in the world, begin to acquire similar outlooks. Whether it be the upper middle class in India, the upper class in China, the upper classes in Russia, or the upper classes in South America
or North America. In the large cosmopolitan areas, they will have very similar mindsets. But at the same time, as this process of global capitalist globalization, which if you go to the Dorchester Hotel here, you think the Saudi Arabian princes behave any better in terms of sexual relations? In their own terms, I mean, than Berlusconi does, King of Bunga Bunga, or Donald Trump does, King of Grab Your Pussy? No, they have the same mindset and behavior, which stems from power relations, from their belief in their right to abuse people. Now, on the other side, you also have billions of people on Earth who have never had wealth, whose generations going back in the history of the hominid species, the upright creature, walking on two legs, manipulating tools, shaping nature and the environment around them. Since the origin of hominids, the majority of mankind has accumulated no wealth. The majority have accumulated no wealth despite 3 million years of ancestors. And because of this, as they are interlinked and have been interlinked in the last 20 years, nay, in the last 10 years, the whole of humanity, almost without exception, has been connected together by mobile phones and the internet. Even in the furthest, most remote mountain areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan, they have internet, they have pornography, they have access to news from around the world, they can buy something on the dark web, they can participate in a discussion forum of lesbians in San Francisco, right? And many of them do, out of curiosity. Now, what does that mean? It means the speed at which the transformation in the psychological relationship of human beings networked together for the first time in the history of humanity clashes directly with the historical background, the tradition, the conditions, the experiences of thousands of years of tradition. Consequently, that psychological clash leads to the most peculiar variants. For example, how else can you explain hundreds of people from Britain getting on buses and planes to Turkey to walk across the border and fight in Syria as a member of ISIL against the Syrian government, the Russians, the British, the French and so on? How else can you explain it? And people from those countries coming to England, some of them, and attempting to carry out some terror. Actually, most, to be fair, nearly all the terrorist attacks in Britain have been homegrown. But no doubt some of the people who come here would like to carry out a terrorist attack. On the other side, despite what the British government argues, and the British courts argue, the British government, and people will look at this again, in the mountain in Pakistan, a kid will sit there, he put on his iPhone, he put on his an internet video, and there he sees someone from Luton explaining how terrible and kufar the world here is, and how it needs to be destroyed. And he will also explain that Britain has gone to Afghanistan 4 times to kill. Afghanistan never came to England to kill. Has gone to Iraq, the Italians to Libya, the French to Morocco, The French to Algeria. The British, the whole of Africa. With the Portuguese and the Belgians and the Dutch. And the Americans continuing this process. Mass slaughter, mass torture, waterboarding, rendition, claims of chemical weapons. Well, you know that some people go, how can you challenge the idea that the Russians killed or tried to kill Skripal in Salisbury? I mean, they seem to think we've got no memory. Not only do we have a memory, but we can check. Perhaps accurately, perhaps inaccurately. Most people aren't trained to search and research. Most people don't know the difference between how to check a fact and what is a story. Most people don't know. Because most of the time, we are spun stories, whether it be by the mainstream press, whether it be by politicians, by armies, governments, historians. Each of these groups of people are connected to interests and power and wealth. And therefore, when this young child of 10, 12 years of age goes on the internet, they've learned enough English or they can see in Arabic a YouTube video of Jihadi John in Luton explaining why he's gone to Syria to kill Englishmen. And he talks about the war in Iraq, the war in Syria, the war in Libya, the history of wars. Then of course, they will find some affinity with that man. And these clashes are global clashes happening to us. That is why Tommy Robinson and his fans came to Speaker's Corner a couple of months ago to try and take it over, to try and cause conflict. Because they knew by coming here, they'll antagonise the Muslims. If they get a fight between the Muslims and the EDL, or better said, Tommy Robinson's new fan base, post-EDL, including Donald Trump's son, I hear, then of course they'll achieve an objective. The most famous place for free speech in the world, brought to a battleground between Muslims and English far-right nationalists. That's what they want. That's what they want. And the global clashes are a consequence of the nature of capitalism. Marx wrote in 1848 in the Communist Manifesto, capitalism smashes down all Chinese walls, transforms the world, reorganizes the world, makes the world in its image. But also, capitalism, when it faces destruction by the working classes, the majority, taking over control of the planet and of its resources, which ultimately are rooted in one thing: their brains and their hands. Their brains and their hands. When people take control of their brains and their hands, and they aren't used by other people, for which you get a piece of paper at the end of the week, live on that. When people take control of their lives, then of course the old order faces destruction. So it either the old order is overthrown, re-establishes its authority, or drags the world down into destruction. That is the prediction which Marx made in 1848, and I believe it has validity today. You were looking at me sceptical, I presume you wanted to say something.
A wee bit.
Go ahead.
Did Russia not invade Afghanistan?
Russia did invade Afghanistan, yes.
So, but only capitalism destroys?
No, Russia invaded Afghanistan once, Britain invaded Afghanistan 4 times.
Okay, numbers.
So, 75% more. Or better said, sorry, 400% more.
I don't understand you.
Define what you mean by invade. You said Russia invaded Afghanistan. What do you mean?
You don't know the history of the Russian invasion of
Well,
Afghanistan?
the Russian invasion of... Very simple fact is, although I understand it might sound stupid for me to say this, I'll qualify it, but the Russian government was invited into Afghanistan by the government of Afghanistan. Now, it's perfectly true that you could argue it was an illegitimate government. You could argue that. Had there been a democratic vote in Afghanistan, where each person had the right to vote, probably they would not have voted for Najibullah. You're right. However, they would have voted for bin Laden. Is that really what you want?
Maybe it's their choice.
Well, maybe it is their choice, but if they choose that choice, Britain and America consider it their God-given right to overthrow the government.
Well, I disagree with that too.
But that's what they believe. And that's why, for example, IS, probably in Iraq, 2 years ago, IS probably had a majority support. Now, are you going to tolerate that? No, look at what happened in Algeria. When what's the party called? I can't remember the name of the party. Huh? No, not that time there. A few years, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I can't remember the exact time. The Algerians voted for an Islamic fundament. The French wouldn't, no one tolerated that government. So the truth of the matter is, we must qualify what democracy means, and we must understand the processes of change in the world and how they are interconnected with the way in which capitalism, the dynamics of capitalism, bring about clashes between the development of productive forces, the unification of the world economically, and yet the condition of the masses remains miserable. And therefore they are susceptible to being turned one against another, whether it be the European Union, the Brexit issue, Donald Trump, borders, nationalism, immigration, migration, sexual questions, national questions, local questions. When the world is expanding, when living standards are improving, cosmopolitanism becomes dominant. When the world is contracting or in slow growth, and people sense the disparity between the potential for development, what they feel they themselves could add to the world, which most people know they can do. Now with modern technology, you can produce in 1 day's work what would have taken years of work in the past. And yet that additional productivity does not go to the hands of you and I, it goes into the hands of Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates.
Let's say in the 1800s, royalty would not have quality footwear like they're wearing right now.
What's that?
In the 1800s.
Yes, but the quality footwear didn't come from the owners of Adidas. The quality footwear. Well, actually, you're incorrect. Every single significant component of this phone was produced by the state. The companies rode on the back of state innovation, particularly the CIA's development, NASA's development, the military technology. All of these technologies are state-financed, publicly funded technologies. Touchstone screen, hang on, touchstone, wait a minute. What incentive, my friend? My friend, you just said to me, well, you're incorrect. Your fact, my friend.
Let's not make it ab hominem.
No, it's not accurate what you're saying. You are believing in the ideology of capitalism, not the reality of capitalism. And let me just clarify, then you come back, yeah? The ideology of capitalism led you to make a statement that was incorrect. Now, I tried to clarify why it was incorrect and why that matters. Now, the phone is a technology that all of us probably consider, wow, that's really cool, we can do all these things, right? Now, the problem lies in this. Although you can do all these things with this phone, you mistakenly believed that this was some invention of a clever capitalist who wanted to make some money for himself. That's what you think is the origin of this phone. Now, I contested that, and I'll back it with simple facts. The touch-tone screen, that was invented by the CIA, not by some private company. The reason being is this. If I'm a private entrepreneur, the classical private entrepreneur who came from nothing, the illusionary entrepreneur, like Bill Gates, remember? What did they say about Bill Gates? Where did he come from? He started in the garage, they say, right? Now, who's this other guy? Richard Branson. They say, started in a garage. Somehow, the garage always seems to be the suitable starting point. The fact that Bill Gates' family were well-to-do, the fact that he got in on the reason he got his business, he was working with someone by the name of Gary Tilder. Gary Tilder was someone who believed in the ethos of early computing. And that ethos was quite simple. Quite simple. It was that computing ideas are programs built one on top of another. 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, built on top of each other. Whereby the information, how that's constructed, the DNA of the program, was universally accessible to anybody. So you could look at that DNA structure of a computer program and you could deconstruct it and amend it. Amend the program to do this rather than that. It could be a physical action, as this camera is recording now, and it can be remotely controlled. So it's not necessary for the physical action of a human being to be like, like a motion activity. It could be a mental activity, making something work. And of course, in future, most work will be mental activity. Physical labor will gradually diminish as new technology replaces it. The World Wide Web, why is this cool? Because you can go on the World Wide Web and use the internet. The reason why Bill Gates became a billionaire is because his partner, Gary Tilder, I believe it is, refused to sell the software he'd created. And that is what Bill Gates wanted to sell. He got an offer from IBM, put the program on all our computers. He went to Gary Tilder, Tilder said, I'm not selling it. This is public domain information, not private. And so what Bill Gates did was he went behind Gary Tilder's back, reverse engineered his program and stole it. Then he sold the stolen program to IBM. That's how he became a billionaire. And then, stage two, just one more sentence. Stage two, one sec, stage two. When you've already accumulated lots of money, then the same way that you accumulated money by theft, you forbid anybody else to do that. And you say, if you copy my program or you try and play around with my program, you go to jail or get a massive fine. And in that way, turning the initial theft into legitimate money, into permanently protected resources, is the pathway to monopolistic rents. That's actually how the system operates. It does not function on entrepreneurs, it functions on monopolistic and oligopolistic power that you cannot challenge because it's self-replicating.
Marx was good at giving, criticism of capitalism, but he didn't really come up with a great solution. Communism never worked at all. Capitalism is the result of hundreds of years of trial and error, and it's the best thing we have. No one's kind of created the ideology, it's just how the chips are set. Right.
The ideology,
You come up with a system.
you said to me, no one has, I'm answering.
Beat that with 1,000 years of experience, with one sort of ultimate idea. That's impossible. No man's going to do that.
Well, the truth of the matter is, barter is not capitalism. Barter is pre-capitalist. In other words, you've got a bag, you exchange it for my recording device. Right? That's not barter. I'm sorry, that's barter, not capitalism.
It's a transaction.
A transaction has got nothing to do with capitalism. Has it?
Is that not what we do?
Where is it based on then? What is the transaction based on? No. Well, capitalism operates, capitalism operates on the basis of transactions, yes. Does that mean capitalism equals transactions? No.
But what does it equal?
Capitalism is a system, the gentleman here pointed out first of all, is a system of commodity production. In other words, we're not exchanging goods that already exist. Instead of this, we are producing new goods. Where does that production come from? It comes from human labor power. It doesn't come from, a leaf falling from the tree and I swap a leaf for your bag, right? I produce a tree in a nursery, I put resources into it, I labor on that tree to produce it to sell to someone. I sell it for money. I accumulate the money, and then with that money I carry out the transaction for a profit. If you exchange your money for a bag in the shop on Oxford Street, you are also not being a capitalist. All you are doing...
Profiting off someone's labour.
Sorry?
VAT.
What?
Profiting off someone's labour. The abstract idea of value-added tax to make sure...
On the
standard
contrary, you're not.
is
You are not.
luggage will be up to scratch.
You are
That's
merely
someone else's
exchanging
labour.
your labour for their labour. Probably on almost equal terms.
Profits are subject to tax.
It's concealed behind. If I go to a shop and then I look at that bag and I say, oh, I like that bag, here's £10 for the bag. I purchased the bag from you, you've got £10, right? I go away, there's lots of other shops selling bags there as well. So it's not like there's no competition. The competition exists. They will not sell bags, however, if they don't make a profit out of them. If on every bag they sell, they lose £2, they're not going to sell them. Simple as that. So they must make a profit. Where does the profit come from? Not from you buying it. It doesn't come from you. You're an arbitrary person walking past. The profit must come from somewhere else. You're paying £10, he's giving you a bag. If that £10 leads to some extraordinary profit rate, let's say 50% profit rate on every bag, then every bloody shop in Oxford Street is going to be selling bags and nothing else. So instead of that, what we have is an equalisation of the profit rates right across the sectors, whether it's the production of nuclear weapons, or the production of steamships, or the building of a tower block, or the selling of bags. All of them operate on a relatively similar rate of profit, because capitalism is a universal system seeking profit. The problem is this: the profit doesn't come from me paying you £10 for that bag. The profit comes from me paying someone to make a bag. Because by paying someone to make a bag, I can pay you £5 and you can make £10 worth of goods. Only human beings do that. Only human labour power does that. That's where the wealth of the capitalist comes from. That's the beauty of Marx's study.
What about automation?
Sorry?
What about automation? You could make a factory
Automation increases the productive capacity of the worker.
Or maybe there's no workers. Maybe it's completely automated.
If there are no workers, there's no profit.
Sure there is. That's why automation is so popular, because it allows you to make more profit.
No,
without having to pay
automation
people.
allows
Yes.
a company to gain a first entrant advantage over the other company. As soon as iPhone bring out this is the latest one, iPhone 72, I bought it yesterday in the Apple store. There were only 3 being sold. I killed 3 people queuing in the queue. I eventually got it for £6,000. But today, Samsung have brought out the Samsung 50, which is more efficient, faster, superior, and cheaper. And therefore, I've lost my first entrant advantage. I've spent vast sums of money on the new technology. I've tried to stop anyone else copying it, but someone in China has copied it. And therefore, the profit rate will begin to decline. That's why, in a period, we think what the era we're living in, for God's sake. We are living in the most revolutionary era in history, in technology, in science, in knowledge, in education and culture. But at the same time as we live in this extraordinary escalation in the speed of technological and scientific advance, we simultaneously live in an era of catastrophic decline. Culturally, politically, educationally,
You think so?
economically. Yes.
In what regard?
What do you mean in what regard? It is
We're
the
living
biggest
better than
economic
any other
crisis
area in
since
history.
the 1930s. Why have we got such an economic crisis?
say that, but
when
where's the
technology, science, culture, education are exponentially increasing. Exponentially increasing. All the knowledge that used to be the preserve, think back to Gutenberg, to Martin Luther in 1517, sticking his edict, 97 statements in Wittenberg, bringing down the Catholic Church and its dictatorship and its murderous hierarchy, bringing that down by the press. And yet, in the last 10 years, All mankind has access to the knowledge of an Oxford or Cambridge student and beyond. In fact, of an Oxford or Cambridge professor.
Okay. Is this
All mankind has that in their fingertips. And yet, thousands of people drown in the Mediterranean trying to come to Europe. Concentration camps, in inverted commas, I'll use the word, detention camps are being created in Germany and Austria to hold the migrants. The Italian government is deliberately murdering people in the Mediterranean. And the discussion in Britain is about how we're going to leave the other country and look after ourselves. Because otherwise we're all going to starve to death because the country's so poor. Meanwhile, across the street here, I seem to remember from my childhood, Park Lane was number 2 on the Monopoly map. And yet, here in Park Lane, billions of pounds of empty property is sitting there. Unused. Unused. And so, when they tell you that there is progress corresponding to the technical, it's a lie. Technical progress cannot be developed by capitalism. That's what the lesson of history is. Capitalism hinders technical progress. But because we're moving fast, you know, it's like
Is this not a question of morality?
Bertolt Brecht once wrote a poem. And the summation of it was very, very short. And he said, with my father, I remember the first motor car. With my son, I saw the first aeroplane cross the Atlantic. With my grandson, I watched the nuclear bomb fall. So we get an understanding of the inherent dynamics of capitalism. Marx did not actually discuss communism in any detail. What he said was, what he spent his life in London doing, was studying the system we live under, so that he could answer questions like that. Is this a clever invention of an entrepreneur? Or is it a creation of the hands and brains of the masses? Is it an instrument to connect humanity? Or is it an instrument to make profit for somebody? It is an important distinction.
It could be both.
It could be both.
Why not?
Well, I agree, why not? It is like, I agree with you in this respect. It is like a machine gun. In fact, you should understand it like that. Because actually it's more powerful than a machine gun. Because it connects all the people who have got machine guns. And all those who haven't got machine guns. And therefore, if you want to shape the future of the minds of the people, and to shape the direction which society takes, there's a phrase used by Leon Trotsky that's essential and important to understand. As I said, the mobile phone was not invented by Steve Jobs or these entrepreneurs of the private companies. Every component of the mobile phone was a product of war, was a product of the military or the intelligence agencies. And Leon Trotsky said this, and I'll end on this. You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. We are the target of war, the object of war, the purpose of war is to get, yes, war. Politics is a continuation of war by other means. War is a continuation of politics by other means. And politics and war are the continuation of business by other means. Business is controlled by a tiny handful of companies in this world. I don't mean, this is where you're mistaken. I do not mean a fish and chip shop. I do not mean an ice cream stand. I do not mean the 6 million companies that exist in Britain. I have nothing against small businesses, intermediate-sized businesses. But the world today is not controlled by them.
Corporations.
The world today is controlled by 780 companies that control 80% of the entire world trade. They control the world. And to be deluded into thinking that anybody can get up and join them, it's just idiocy. It's a children's fairy story.
We can change
Just
it.
like kissing a frog who turns into a prince, or climbing up a woman's hair to get to the top of a tower to marry the princess. It's a child's dream, a delusion, and it's a necessary delusion to maintain the subservience of the people. Coming back to the fundamental question, is democracy important? Yes, if we use it in the right way. But democracy does not automatically produce positive results. Look at Donald Trump. Look at Theresa May.
And positive for some people.
But I hope that when the election comes, which I now think is the information I've got from Labour Party sources, is it will probably be before Christmas time. I believe Jeremy Corbyn will win a landslide majority. However, there are many people inside the Labour Party who want to sabotage a Labour government. Because the old elite, they exist in the Tory party, they exist in the Labour Party, they exist in the Liberal Party, they exist in Plaid Cymru, in the SNP, and the genuine advocates of change, like Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party, are a minority. And therefore, when Jeremy Corbyn's elected Prime Minister of this country, it will be absolutely essential to mobilise the mass of the people, to put pressure on the MPs, to abide by the policies and the will of the people. And if they don't, yes, we need to remove them. Because only if you have genuine democratic control from the base, rule by the people, and not an enslaved people, only then do you have a genuine democracy. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. See you again next week.
You want to take a break? Let's see, Dave. I think I met you that last time. Is he live? Fans of everything? Yeah, can I get up and do that? Is he live? Fans of everything? Yeah, can I get up and do a little special? Yeah. You're the speaker. Yeah, right. All right, does anybody want to stick around for this one? Might be interesting to some people. Roll up. All right, my name is Heiko Dave, and I'm quite regular down here. And what I want to share with you today is two fundamental questions.